They say memories fade with time. Mine didn't. They sharpened. Every time I passed the coffee shop on 5th and Harrow, I remembered the exact way his hand used to rest on mine. Possessive, not affectionate. How he'd order for me without asking. Always the same thing, black tea, no sugar, because that's how he liked it, and eventually, how I was supposed to like it too. I remember the day he stopped touching my hand altogether. It had been a Wednesday. He came home late, suit wrinkled, eyes empty, and dropped a single sentence like an anchor in my chest. Beth, this just isn't working anymore. You're a part of my past now. He didn't look at me when he said it, just turned and walked into the study like I hadn't shared a bed with him for 22 years, like I hadn't raised his son while he built his empire, like I was some outdated chapter in his biography, tolerated, not treasured. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I made him dinner that night, like always, turkey casserole. He didn't touch it, just went back to that damn study and closed the door. I remember staring at the old prenup we'd signed before we even had matching towels. Back then, it had felt like a formality, something his father's lawyer insisted on. I was just a school teacher from Louisville. He was a real estate prince. I didn't ask questions. I signed. But I kept a copy. Even when we moved, even when we bought the lake house, even when he swore we were forever, and I believed him like a fool, I kept that document in a sealed manila envelope tucked between old tax returns and baby pictures in the upstairs drawer. And when he said I was just part of his past, I remembered it. Funny how that works. Memories. They only fade when you want to remember, but if you want to forget, they're carved into bone. After the divorce, he left me with a 1-bedroom condo and a settlement that barely covered half the cost of our old gardener. The house, the summer place, the business, all legally protected through shell companies and slippery accounting. He'd learned how to hide his empire before he even decided to leave. It wasn't heartbreak. It was an execution. I was just too naive to see it coming. The day the papers were finalized, he shook my hand, shook it, like I was a business acquaintance and not the woman who held him after his mother died, who drove him to the ER that winter he slipped on the stairs and cracked 3 ribs. Then he leaned in, voice low like he was telling a secret. You'll be all right, Beth. I mean, you were never really meant for this life anyway. I stood still. Like if I didn't move, maybe I'd wake up in my old kitchen making breakfast and hating his favorite tie again. But I didn't. He walked away with his new girlfriend draped over his arm like a designer accessory. She was 32. I was 68. People stopped looking at me after that, like divorce made me invisible, or maybe like I'd always been invisible, and now they didn't have to pretend. For 3 years, I lived quietly. The condo overlooked a parking lot. My social life consisted of grocery store clerks and the odd neighbor who mistook me for someone's grandmother. I taught myself to knit. Not because I liked it, but because counting stitches was the only thing that kept my mind from going dark. Sometimes I'd watch his name pop up in business magazines. Still thriving, still throwing galas, still dating models who thought real estate meant personality. One day, an article mentioned him being engaged again, to someone half his age, twice his energy, it said. Classy. That same week, I bumped into Cheryl, my former neighbor from the lake house days. She looked me up and down like I was a misplaced artifact and said, "Oh, Beth, you really just vanished, didn't you?" Vanished. Like I had no place in this world anymore, like I'd evaporated the moment he let me go. I went home that night and dug out the envelope. The prenup, still sealed, still there. And that's when I saw it. A clause buried on page 6, something about shared investment structures and breach of fiduciary duty during marriage, legalese mostly. But to my surprise, it wasn't just a dead document. It had teeth. The next morning, I didn't go to the store. I didn't knit. I called Ellen. She was an old friend from my teaching days who'd gone on to become an attorney. We hadn't spoken in years. She was the one who warned me not to marry him back in '88. "Beth," she said on the line, confused at first, then curious. "You sound different. I need you to look at something," I said. "Is this about him?" I hesitated, then smiled just enough to feel it in my cheeks. "No, it's about me." That day was the first time in a long while I didn't feel like someone's leftover or someone's past. I felt like a woman with a plan, not for revenge, not even justice, just closure. But sometimes closure looks like a closed casket, and sometimes you're the one lowering the lid. Ellen took one look at the prenup and said, "Beth, did you know what you were signing back then?" I shook my head. I signed it at a diner, between bites of apple pie and his father's lecture on asset protection. She ran her fingers across the pages, brow furrowed. Her office was stacked with case files and legal journals, but the way she looked at my envelope, like it was a forgotten grenade, made my heart race. "There's language in here that would make a hedge fund lawyer sweat," she muttered. "I'm surprised his team didn't revise it after the marriage. Maybe they thought I was too stupid to read it, I said, folding my hands in my lap, or too kind to use it. Ellen looked up. Were they wrong? I met her eyes. They were wrong about a lot of things. Within 2 weeks, Ellen's paralegal had unearthed enough documentation to make my ex-husband, Robert Franklin, local real estate darling, smug public speaker, and serial heartbreaker, very, very uncomfortable. Turns out, a clause in our original prenup required full disclosure of all financial assets annually, as long as any of our investments remained tied. And guess what? One of the minor shell companies that Robert and I opened to purchase rental properties, he never dissolved it. He forgot. Just one piece of paperwork, one overlooked LLC. And because of that, I still legally held 50% ownership in a company that now managed 5 luxury condos, 2 beachfront rentals, and a commercial plaza in the city. He hadn't paid me a cent in dividends. Ellen's voice cut through the stunned silence in her office. This is serious breach of fiduciary duty. He's exposed, Beth. If we wanted to, we could file for retroactive earnings, mismanagement, failure to report shared profits. She kept listing violations like they were bullet points in a recipe. I wasn't listening. I was too busy replaying Robert's voice in my head. You were never really meant for this life anyway. I smiled softly. Let's make sure he remembers I was. Ellen sent a formal notice of financial audit to Robert's business address. 3 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail was crisp and venom-laced. Beth, I don't know what the hell you're doing, but I'm not in the mood for games. You need money? Fine, call me. But dragging lawyers into this, especially her, isn't a smart move. He still talked like I was a charity case. Still thought this was about needing him. Poor man. He was confusing greed with dignity. I forwarded the voicemail to Ellen. She chuckled. He's panicking. Good, I replied. I'm just getting started. That same week, I attended a charity gala. Not because I wanted to, because I knew Robert would be there. With her. Her name was Paige. Blonde, tan, magazine sculpted. The kind of woman who wore red dresses to events with white linen themes and got away with it. She called Robert Bobby and kissed his cheek like she was staking claim. She didn't recognize me. I stood across the room, sipping seltzer, dressed in charcoal gray. People didn't look at me twice anymore. That was my advantage. But Robert, he saw me, and he froze. He smiled quickly, too quickly, and wrapped his arm tighter around Paige, like shielding himself from something contagious. Then he turned his back. I didn't need a scene. I needed a signature. Ellen had sent a follow-up request for full financial disclosure, citing the prenup clause. He had 30 days to comply. If he refused, we'd file for breach of contract and fraud, and possibly embezzlement, depending on what else we dug up. By week 2, Ellen's team had found something even more damning. He'd used our joint LLC to take out a line of credit, several times, during our marriage and after. That meant he was leveraging my legal assets to fund his ventures, without consent, without disclosure. That wasn't just a civil violation. That was criminal exposure. Ellen looked at me as we sat in her office, files stacked between us. If we bring this to court, she said, he won't just lose money. He could lose licenses, maybe even face charges. I stirred my tea slowly. My hands didn't shake, not anymore. I don't want to destroy him, I said quietly. I want to remind him I'm not disposable. Ellen nodded. Well, that's going to cost him. The wedding date was announced in early June, a high-profile event at a vineyard 3 towns over, 250 guests, live jazz band, gourmet catering, no expense spared. They even published an announcement in the paper. Bobby Franklin to marry entrepreneur Paige Keegan in a private celebration of love and new beginnings. New beginnings. That phrase stuck in my throat. He really thought he could restart his life like I'd never been there. Like I hadn't stitched together his suits, edited his speeches, held him through stomach flus and self-doubt. He forgot the woman who made him. He forgot the ink that bore his signature. He forgot the page 6 clause. 3 days before the ceremony, we sent the formal packet, a legal challenge, all the evidence, misuse of shared assets, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and, most importantly, the active claim to 50% ownership in the commercial plaza being used to partially fund the wedding. If he didn't respond, the lawyer said, the sheriff would deliver it in person. I told Ellen, no, let me. She raised a brow. You want to serve him yourself? I want him to look me in the eyes and realize what he turned his back on. She didn't argue. That night, I ironed my old Navy dress. Nothing flashy, just classic, strong. I pulled out my pearl necklace. Not because it was pretty, but because it was mine, a gift from my mother, worn at my first job interview, my son's high school graduation, the day I bought my first car. Robert used to joke that the pearls made me look too matronly. That night, they made me feel powerful. Not loud, not vengeful, just grounded. I looked in the mirror and didn't see someone's ex-wife. I saw the storm they forgot was coming. I didn't expect to recognize her. But the universe has a way of putting faces in your path when it wants you to pay attention. The first time I saw Paige Keegan up close, it was from the back of a fundraiser program. I'd picked it up out of boredom, waiting for Ellen in the courthouse hallway. A full-page ad displayed her real estate branding. Paige Keegan, young, dynamic, unstoppable. Beneath it, a photograph. Striking, confident, poised. Something about her eyes tugged at me. So I started digging. Not out of jealousy, not out of bitterness, out of instinct. Her name pulled up a handful of glossy articles. Entrepreneur spotlights, glamour spreads, but real details? Sparse. Then I found something buried in a Nevada court docket, a civil suit. 5 years ago. Settled quietly. Paige Keegan, formerly Paige Serrano. Sued by the adult son of a man she'd briefly cared for during his stroke recovery. She was accused of isolating him, pressuring him to sell a vacation property, and inserting herself into his financial dealings. The suit was dropped after his death. No official wrongdoing. But the son's testimony was chilling. She got close, fast, took over his care, bank access, mail. When I tried to intervene, she told me he was confused, that I was stressing him. It hit me like a slap, because I'd heard those same words from my daughter-in-law years ago when Robert and I had started to fracture. It's always the same playbook. Make the ex look crazy. Make the new woman look like peace. I sent the file to Ellen. She called within hours. Beth, are you thinking what I'm thinking? That he's being played? That you're not the only one he's underestimated? We both fell silent for a moment. Then I asked, can we make this work for us? Her voice shifted, sharpened. Oh, we're absolutely going to. The next week, we shifted strategy. We weren't just going after financial justice anymore. We were going after optics. Because if there's one thing Robert valued more than his money, it was his image. So we drafted a new letter. This one wasn't a legal demand. It was a formal intent to challenge the validity of his wedding venue transaction, citing misappropriated funds from jointly owned property, and noting that his fiancée might soon be involved in ongoing investigations of financial coercion should we decide to revisit certain case files. It was subtle, elegant, poison wrapped in ribbon. We knew he'd read between the lines. Sure enough, I received an email from his lawyer 2 days later. One of those overly polite men with 2 white teeth and a signature font that looked like it belonged on Christmas cards. His message was brief. My client is willing to discuss a private settlement to avoid any disruption of upcoming personal events. He meant the wedding. I declined the offer. I had no intention of stopping the wedding. I had every intention of attending it. The day of the ceremony, I didn't arrive early. I arrived exactly when I meant to. Just after the prelude, music began. When the guests were seated, the candles lit, and Robert was standing at the altar with his bow tie already undone once and redone out of nerves. He stood beneath a canopy of imported orchids, smiling like a politician. Paige stood beside him, radiant and smug. The moment I walked in, the room shifted. No gasp, no chaos. Just silence. Heads turned slowly. Some didn't recognize me. Others did, and whispered with wide eyes. I didn't make a scene. I walked to the 3rd row and sat down. Center aisle. Perfect view. 2 minutes later, Ellen walked in behind me holding a leather portfolio. And Robert? He went pale. I saw the exact moment his stomach dropped when he realized this was not a coincidence. This was a reckoning. The officiant cleared her throat. If anyone here objects to the union... Ellen stood. Not me. Not yet. Ellen. I apologize for the interruption, she said, voice calm and controlled. But there are legal matters regarding this venue and the funding of this event that must be addressed before this ceremony continues. Robert's jaw locked. Guests murmured. Paige looked at him confused. What's going on? He didn't answer. Ellen turned to the crowd. This location was partially funded through assets currently under legal review, tied to a jointly owned company between Mr. Franklin and my client, Elizabeth Franklin. People started standing. A few guests got up and walked out quietly. One man cursed under his breath. Then finally I stood. I didn't say anything at first, just walked to the front. I reached into my bag and handed the officiant a sealed envelope, the original prenup, marked with a certified timestamp and the original notary's seal. Then I turned to Robert, looked him dead in the eyes. I never forgot what you promised me, Robert. You just hoped I'd never remember. His voice cracked. Beth, you can't be serious. Not now. Not here. You said I was just your past, I said softly, but you tied yourself to me legally and financially, and I have every right to remind you the past has teeth. Then Paige did something I didn't expect. She took off her ring. No fury, no drama, just a hard stare at Robert. Is this true? She asked him. Did you use shared funds? He didn't answer. His silence said enough. She looked at me not with pity, but with respect, then at Ellen. Could I see the file you mentioned? Ellen handed her a copy. Paige took it, turned to the guests, and whispered something I'll never forget. Sorry, folks. Looks like we're canceling the fairy tale. She walked out. He didn't follow. I stood there for another minute, not smiling, not gloating, just standing. Then I turned to the guests still sitting and said, Carry on, everyone. This part of the show is over, and walked out with Ellen. The video made it to the internet before I got home. Not by me. I wouldn't have dared, but someone in the crowd, probably one of Paige's influencer friends, had been filming the ceremony. As I watched the clip on my tablet, the moment replayed, me handing the prenup to the officiant, Ellen standing stone still beside me, Robert's face flushing gray. The caption read, Wedding crashed by his legal wife. You can't make this up. It had 6,000 views before the hour was over. By morning, nearly 500,000. The fallout was swift. Paige moved out of his penthouse before the end of the week. A delivery truck was spotted hauling away 3 suitcases, 2 paintings, and what looked like a Louis Vuitton dog carrier. She didn't say a word publicly. She didn't need to. Robert released a brief, patronizing statement. Sometimes people from your past show up for reasons of their own. It's unfortunate, but we wish her well. But his tone, his carefully selected words, only added fuel. The comments roasted him alive. Your past still owns half your business? Who even marries without dissolving shared assets? Amateur move. Beth's a legend. She didn't yell, she owned. I didn't reply, not once, but I read every word. By the following Monday, Ellen filed an official motion to freeze all business accounts related to the joint LLC. Robert's lawyer scrambled to contest it, but we had documentation going back a decade. His misuse was clear, repeated, and sloppy. Ellen didn't smile when the court signed the injunction. Neither did I. We didn't need to. We had facts, and leverage, and silence. I was eating breakfast in my kitchen, oatmeal and tea, the usual, when a knock came at the door. I opened it to find a woman in her mid-40s, hair pulled into a tight bun, holding a portfolio. Mrs. Franklin, she asked. Used to be, I replied. I'm Jennifer, investigator with the state's Department of Business Regulation. We've received some concerning reports involving misuse of co-owned real estate assets by Mr. Robert Franklin. I'd like to ask a few questions. She didn't need to ask twice. I invited her in. She stayed for almost 2 hours. I gave her everything. Emails, ledgers, witness names. She didn't blink when I mentioned Paige's previous lawsuit, just jotted it down like one more nail in a very ornate coffin. When she stood to leave, she paused at the door. You know, she said, we get a lot of cases like this, but it's rare to see someone so prepared. I just nodded. Let them laugh at your fall, I whispered. That way they won't hear you getting back up. That week, Robert called. I stared at the screen for 5 full rings before I answered. Beth, he said, voice low, tired. You made your point. No, I replied calmly. The courts will make it. Come on, he said. You really want to see me lose everything? I looked out the window, watching a bird hop along the rail. I lost everything when you walked out and called me a phase. This is me making sure no other woman gets lied to the way I did. He paused, then tried another angle. Look, I'm not a monster, all right? Maybe I made mistakes, but you didn't make mistakes, Robert. You made choices. You just didn't think I'd remember them. And I hung up. The bank accounts were the next to go. Ellen's filings ensured that no profit could be withdrawn, no loans extended, and no ownership transferred without my signature. The tenants of our jointly owned commercial plaza were notified. I even visited them just once to introduce myself. Most were kind. One said, "So you're the ex-wife he never mentions." I smiled. I'm the reason he still has a plaza. 2 weeks later, Robert's luxury vehicle lease was terminated due to unsettled co-owner disputes. His precious silver Mercedes was towed from a country club parking lot. I didn't arrange that, but I didn't stop it either. Meanwhile, I started going out again. Not far. A bookstore here, a cafe there. I kept my makeup minimal, my hair soft and silver. I was no longer hiding. People recognized me, quietly, politely. A few women approached, unsure. You were at that wedding, right? Yes, I'd say, sipping my coffee. I used to be his wife. One woman, maybe late 50s, leaned in close and whispered, "You gave me hope. I left my husband after watching that." I didn't know what to say, so I said, "Good." She cried anyway. I started journaling again. Not for anyone else, just for me. I wrote down memories, not of the marriage, of who I used to be before it. The Beth who danced in the kitchen barefoot while burning grilled cheese. The Beth who could tell a joke that made her friends wheeze with laughter. The Beth who believed in her own voice. I missed her, but she was coming back. Ellen came by one evening with takeout and a thick folder. "Do you want the good news or the better news?" she said, tossing her briefcase down on the floor. "Better," I said. She grinned. "The state wants to press formal charges against him. Civil fraud, business misrepresentation, and failure to report shared asset income." I took a long sip of tea. And the good news? He has a new lawyer. Yours quit after finding out he lied about the original prenup. We laughed. Not loud, not cruel, just the kind of laugh that lives in your lungs after years of silence. People used to mock me behind my back, whisper that I'd let myself go or lost my spark. Let them whisper. Because in the quiet, I rebuilt. I let them laugh when I slipped. Now, they'll have to watch me walk tall. And this time, I'm not walking alone. The invitation arrived late. No note. Just an envelope tucked into my condo mailbox, thick, embossed, scented like gardenias. Inside, a wedding invitation. Robert and Paige had rescheduled. Not a grand vineyard affair this time. No jazz band, no drone cameras. Just a private sunset ceremony at a country club. Friends and family only. He still didn't get it. He thought if he kept it smaller, quieter, less extravagant, I'd let it go. But money wasn't the only thing he owed me. It was dignity. I didn't RSVP. Instead, I sent my own envelope, this one registered mail, hand-delivered by Ellen's office courier. Inside, a certified motion for formal court proceedings. Oh, a demand letter for restitution of misappropriated assets from the LLC. And a printed copy of our prenup with a sticky note labeled, "You forgot page 6. We also included a little gift bag tastefully wrapped, a candle labeled, "You burned the wrong bridge." Sometimes, revenge doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be thorough. He received it 2 days before the wedding. I got a voicemail the same night. He didn't even try to hide the panic anymore. "Beth, this has gone far enough. This isn't you. I know you. You're not vindictive. You're hurt. I get that, but you can't keep pushing this. Think about what people are saying. Please. You don't need to ruin everything." I replayed that line twice. You don't need to ruin everything. Funny. Because for 20 years he ruined me slowly, quietly, with charming smiles and gaslighting apologies. I never raised my voice, never embarrassed him. I just stayed quiet, stitched the holes, smiled for the Christmas cards. And now he was watching his empire unravel. Quietly. Just like I'd learned. The judge scheduled the hearing for the Monday after his wedding. I didn't need to show up at the ceremony this time. He'd know I was coming. He just didn't know what I was bringing. The night before the wedding, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Ellen was at her daughter's ballet recital. My neighbor was out of town. My son rarely visited too many memories of what we used to be. I opened the door, and there she stood, Paige. Wearing jeans, no makeup, hair pulled into a messy ponytail. The same woman who once stood beside Robert in a $5,000 gown now looked like she hadn't slept in days. She held a paper cup of coffee in one hand, my prenup folder in the other. "Can we talk?" she asked. I didn't move, not for a long moment. Then I stepped aside. She sat on my couch like someone who wasn't sure if she deserved furniture. I poured her tea without asking and handed it over. She took a sip, then stared at the prenup. "I read every page," she said, "even the fine print." "Did it surprise you?" I asked. She nodded. "The language is ironclad. He's either arrogant or stupid." "Both," I said softly. She smirked. A tired smirk. "I didn't come here to defend him," she added. "I came here because I think you might want to know something." I leaned forward. My heart didn't pound. Not anymore. "What is it?" She opened her phone and showed me a string of messages. They were from Robert. Don't listen to her. She's mentally unstable. This is just her lashing out. If you marry me, she loses power. It's symbolic. She won't do anything once we're legally wed. Trust me, we can outlast her. I didn't blink, because I'd known this was who he was. But seeing it written was still like biting ice. Paige continued. He offered me $50,000 to sign a postnup after the wedding, said it was to protect our future from his past. That's when I knew. She looked up. I'm not marrying him. I said nothing. She placed the prenup on the table, neat, precise. I already walked once, but this time I'm not walking quietly. I spoke with the investigators, gave them everything I knew, how he talked about offshore accounts, the way he bragged about gutting settlements from women. My breath caught. Women? You weren't the only one, she said. There was one before you, and a younger intern after me. Always the same pattern charm, isolate, discard. He just never thought one of us would talk. Why are you telling me now? I asked carefully. She exhaled. Because I think I hate him less than I hate the woman I was becoming around him. When she left, she didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. Some betrayals don't need closure, just truth. And I believed her, because I knew the hollow look she had behind her eyes. I had worn it once. The morning of the wedding, I sat by my window with a crossword puzzle and fresh coffee. Somewhere across town, Robert was likely throwing his phone, screaming at his assistants and wondering where Paige had gone. She didn't show, and he didn't get to blame me for it. He dug his own grave. I just handed him a map. Ellen called that afternoon. Her voice was practically humming. Beth, guess who just filed for bankruptcy protection? My eyebrows raised. Already? His accounts are frozen, remember? Vendors are suing for unpaid invoices. Paige's PR firm pulled out, the media circling like vultures. I let out a slow breath. Not joy, not revenge. Just relief. You okay? She asked. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. For the first time in years, I think I actually am. But the best part? I hadn't even gotten to the courthouse yet. And when I did, the next morning, I wasn't alone. Because as I walked into that marble-floored courtroom dressed in slate gray and pearls, Paige was waiting for me at the door. She held up a folder marked Witness Affidavit and smiled. I didn't sleep that night. Not from anxiety. God, no. Those days were long gone. But from clarity. Clarity is loud when you haven't heard it in years. It hums in your chest. It sits with you at 2 a.m., pours your tea without asking, and whispers, "You're not scared anymore, are you?" No, I wasn't. I wasn't scared of Robert. I wasn't scared of his lawyers. I wasn't even scared of the courtroom. What scared me was how long I'd lived quietly, how long I called survival a personality trait, how I'd made excuses for someone who wouldn't have crossed the street if I were dying on the other side. But I wasn't dying. I was rising. The courthouse smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee. Courtrooms always do. It was a modest civil courtroom. No chandeliers or juries. Just a judge, a few lawyers, and the weight of people's truths sitting like ghosts between every row. I arrived early. Paige was already there. She wore black slacks, a navy blouse, and no lipstick. Nothing performative. Just clean, honest presence. She gave me a quick nod. Not the eager kind, but the kind that says, "I'm not here to be the main character. You are." Ellen showed up with 3 folders, a laptop, and a smile that meant we're about to peel the skin off this man's empire. Then Robert entered. His face was gaunt, paler than usual. No tan, no grin. He looked like a man who finally realized charm is not a currency that cashes in forever. His lawyer, a different one this time, walked 3 steps behind him. No banter, no whispered strategies. Robert didn't look at me. That was fine. I wasn't here for closure. I was here for consequences. The judge was a woman in her 60s with a braided bun and piercing eyes. Her nameplate read Honorable Marjorie Decker, and from the way she immediately took command of the room, I knew she'd eaten men like Robert for breakfast. Ellen stood first. "Your Honor, we're here on behalf of Mrs. Elizabeth Franklin, asserting claims of breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of shared assets, and sustained financial fraud in violation of a valid prenuptial agreement." She handed over documentation, thick, tabbed in triplicate. Robert's lawyer began to counter. Faint protest about the prenup being outdated, that Robert had assumed its relevance had expired with the divorce. Judge Decker raised a hand. "Does the document contain a clause regarding continuing financial disclosures tied to joint investments?" "It does," Ellen confirmed. "Section 6, paragraph 12. The judge looked directly at Robert. "Yeah. Did you ever dissolve the LLC that purchased your commercial properties?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. And that was the first real loss. Ellen then introduced the bombshell. "Your Honor, we'd also like to introduce an affidavit and supporting testimony from a secondary witness, Miss Paige Keegan." You could have heard a pin drop. Robert's lawyer leaned in fast, whispered furiously. But it was too late. Paige stood, walked to the witness box with grace, composure, and the precision of a woman who practiced telling the truth to herself before saying it aloud. "I was engaged to Mr. Franklin. He told me repeatedly that his prior financial obligations were nullified. He claimed his ex-wife was unstable and that no binding contracts remained. I later discovered this was false." Ellen asked, "Did he ever discuss moving shared funds or manipulating them?" "Yes," Paige answered firm. "He bragged that he could have arranged the money on paper so that she'd never find a cent. He also implied that if I married him, she'd lose her grip. His words, not mine." I didn't move. Not a blink. Not a breath. But inside, something uncurled, a chain coming loose after decades of being rusted to my ribs. Then came Ellen's final move. She clicked the remote, and on a courtroom monitor appeared a slideshow. Scanned ledgers, emails, signed wire transfers using LLC letterhead after our divorce. All without my consent. All tied directly to Robert's private investments. One of them had been used to finance the very venue of the canceled wedding. Judge Decker leaned forward. "Mr. Franklin, did you authorize these fund transfers?" Silence. "Were you aware your ex-wife maintained a 50% legal share in the LLC?" More silence. His lawyer placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. Robert finally spoke, voice hoarse. "I didn't think it mattered anymore." The judge's face didn't twitch. "Well, it does." The ruling was swift. Temporary control of the LLC was transferred to my legal team pending full forensic audit. Robert was barred from making any withdrawals or restructuring moves. Restitution payments would be calculated after asset valuation. and given what we had documented, they'd be substantial. But the real blow? The fraud complaint. So, Judge Decker ordered that the case be reviewed for potential criminal charges. She didn't say it to scare him. She said it like a surgeon, announcing the next step in a procedure. Clean, clinical, final. As the session ended, I stood to leave. My knees didn't shake. My chest didn't tremble. For once, I didn't feel the need to clutch my purse like armor. I walked down the aisle past Robert. He didn't look up. But as I passed him, I said quietly, "You spent years pretending I was invisible. That was your first mistake. Your second? Thinking I'd stay that way." Ellen met me outside the building. "Well?" she asked. I let out a long breath. Let's just say, I finally feel tall again. We smiled. Paige exited moments later, her head held high. She didn't stop to talk, just gave me one nod as she passed. That was enough. She was walking out of that man's shadow, too. That night, I cooked myself dinner. Real dinner, not tea and toast. Spaghetti with butter sauce, roasted squash, a glass of red wine. I turned off the news, lit a candle. And for the first time in decades, I didn't eat like I was apologizing for being alone. 2 weeks passed after the hearing, 2 quiet weeks. Not the kind of silence that follows disaster, the kind that comes after you've finally cleaned a wound that's festered for years. I wasn't limping anymore. I was standing. And in that silence, I did something I hadn't done in years. I bought flowers. Peonies, to be exact. Pink and bold. Robert used to call them tacky. Said they made the living room look like a retirement party. So I put them front and center in mine. And every morning I smiled at them like they were a badge of war. The papers had started circling. First a whisper in the business column, then a feature in a Sunday magazine. The ex-wife who bankrupted the real estate kingpin, with a piece of paper. I didn't read the whole thing, just the quote they pulled from someone who knew Robert. He always underestimated quiet people, especially women. They got that right. One morning, I opened my mailbox to find a letter. Handwritten, slanted script, no return address, but I didn't need one. It was from him. Not typed, not lawyered, just Robert. Beth, I've spent the last few nights thinking, I always thought you'd fade away. The truth is, I was the one who disappeared. You just stayed still long enough for me to see it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to apologize. For the things I said, for the things I stole. You weren't a phase. You were the only part of my life that made sense. I ruined it. I hope you get everything I denied you. Robert. I didn't cry. I didn't crumple the page. I folded it, tucked it between the pages of an old book. Jane Eyre, ironically enough. Then I brewed tea. And did nothing else. Because some apologies don't need responses. They need distance. Later that week, Ellen invited me to lunch. Nothing fancy. A cafe with decent chicken salad and even better coffee. We sat by the window. You know, she said, chewing thoughtfully, the settlement offer just came in. 6 figures. High 6. I raised an eyebrow. He's not fighting it. Nope. Too much bad press, too much scrutiny. His new lawyer probably told him to surrender before the audit digs up something uglier. I sipped my coffee. You think he's hiding more? I think men like him always are. She slid a folder across the table. You sign that and it's over. Court-wise, anyway. I opened it, skimmed. Neat columns, clean math. It would more than cover everything I'd lost, and then some. But I hesitated. Not because I didn't want it. Because I realized I didn't need it. That night, I sat in my armchair and stared at the fire, not for warmth, just to think. There was a time when I would have clung to that money like a life raft. But now, I was breathing just fine. I had my name, my spine, my future. I had me. I signed the papers the next morning, calmly, decisively. Ellen filed them before lunch. The money hit my account 48 hours later. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't book a cruise. I donated to the shelter that had helped me after the divorce. And then I booked one thing, a cottage in coastal Maine, for the summer. No company, no expectations, just a place to feel the sea again. A week later, something strange happened. Paige called. Not texted, not emailed. She called. "Hey," she said, her voice softer now. "I know this is awkward, but I wanted to tell you something. I waited. I left town, sold everything, starting over in Seattle. I wanted to thank you for not destroying me when you could have." "You weren't my enemy," I said simply. "Still, I wouldn't have blamed you." There was a pause. Then she asked something that caught me off guard. "Would you ever talk to women about this? What happened? What you did? I know so many women stuck in what I was in. What you were in." I didn't answer right away. But that night I wrote my first blog post, titled, "They said I was just his past, so I became my own future." The morning I left for Maine, I took one last walk through my little condo. The peonies had dried but still stood tall. I packed light, left the prenup behind in a safe, because I wouldn't need it anymore. Outside, a neighbor waved goodbye. She'd watched me leave for years, head down, bag heavy, hope thin. This time, I walked like I'd never been stepped on. Because the truth is, they didn't break me. They taught me how to stand alone, and how to rise not in flames, but in silence. 3 months after the court ruling, Robert lost the last property in his portfolio. It was the lake house, the one he swore I'd never see again, the one he gifted himself the summer our divorce finalized, paid for, ironically, with proceeds from the same LLC that kept me tethered to his empire. Now, it was repossessed. Bank auction. Foreclosed. His name erased from the title like chalk under a hard rain. I didn't gloat. I just drove by once, not to look at the house, to look at the dock, where I used to sit with my son and feed ducks at sunset, where Robert once proposed, promising forever with a shaky voice and a ring he could barely afford at the time. That dock had seen our beginning, and now it saw the end. I heard Robert moved into a smaller apartment, one of the rentals he used to own but never bothered to renovate, a place with leaky plumbing and thin walls. Poetic. Ellen joked that we should send him a housewarming gift, a toolkit and a copy of Divorce for Dummies. I laughed, but only for a second. Because even now, I didn't hate him. Hate takes effort. I was done giving him mine. Meanwhile, the blog took off. Not viral, not flashy, but real. Comments started trickling in. Women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even some in their 30s. Women who had lived in shadows like mine, who had names they'd stopped using, voices they'd buried so deep they forgot what they sounded like. They called me brave. I wasn't brave. I was tired. And sometimes being tired makes you do the one thing you never had the strength for before. Say no. No more quiet. No more pretending. No more being the apology in someone else's sentence. Then came the interview request. A journalist, young, sharp, respectful. She'd read my blog, wanted to tell the story in a column. I said no at first. I didn't need headlines. But she asked something no one else had asked. What would you say to the woman you used to be? And just like that, I said yes. We met at a cafe, same one where Robert once made a scene because the server brought him the wrong wine. I used to shrink during moments like that, smile nervously, apologize to strangers for the man I came with. Now I walked in like I owned the air. She had a notepad but barely used it. Mostly, she just listened. I told her about the prenup, the silence, the wedding, the courtroom, Paige. She asked, "What made you finally do it?" And I said the only thing that was true. I remembered who I was before he told me who I was supposed to be. She didn't speak for a long time after that. Then she closed the notebook. "Thank you," she whispered. The article published a week later. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't revenge porn. It was truth. Calm, measured, rooted. The title was perfect. She didn't break his windows. She broke his legacy with a pen. I read it once, then printed a copy, folded it, tucked it in my nightstand, beside the prenup, beside Robert's letter, not as trophies, as tombstones. Then something happened I never expected. I got a letter from his son. Not mine. His son from a previous relationship, a boy I helped raise for 3 summers before his mother moved him across the country. I hadn't seen him in 20 years. His handwriting was shaky. "Beth, I read the article. I'm sorry I disappeared. I was young and didn't understand what was happening back then. But I remember how you were with me, patient, kind, like a real mom. I wish you'd been treated better. I wish I'd stood up for you. I just wanted to say thank you. You made me feel safe when I didn't have anyone else." I cried then. Not for Robert, for the little boy he never learned how to be. In July, I finally left for Maine. The cottage was quiet, cozy. Salt air seeped into the wood. Every night, I slept with the windows open and a blanket wrapped tight around my shoulders. One morning, I took a walk to the cliffs. The sea roared beneath me. The sky was overcast, thick with fog. I could barely see the horizon. But I didn't need to. Because sometimes you don't need to know what's coming next. You just need to know you survived what came before. Before I left, I wrote one final blog post. Title: A Letter to the Women Still Sitting in Silence. It wasn't long. You are not his mistake. You are not the burden he outgrew. You are not what he made you. You are the chapter he didn't know how to finish. Write your ending. Sign your name to it. And let it stand, bold, final, and beautifully yours. I hit publish, closed the laptop, and walked down to the water, not to wash anything away, but to feel how far I'd come. The day I came back from Maine, the city felt smaller, not duller, just less intimidating. It's strange, when you spend so many years afraid of a name, a place, a memory, you start imagining those things as monsters with enormous shadows. But after you confront them, they shrink, sometimes into nothing, sometimes into just a man with an empty wallet and a quiet apartment. A letter waited for me in my mailbox. This one was typed, formal, no perfume, no scribbled second thoughts. It was from a law firm, not Ellen's. Inside, a single-page document. Robert was dissolving the LLC. He was formally transferring his remaining interest to me. No negotiation, no request, just a line that read, "Per my client's request, he would like to relinquish all rights to the jointly held entity known as Franklin Hill Estates, in full recognition of prior agreements and as a gesture of final closure." I stared at it, then read it again. No catch, no loophole, just surrender. A few days later, Ellen confirmed the paperwork was legitimate. "You own it now," she said, outright. "Every property, every deed, every dime." I exhaled. Feels strange. "You wanted this, didn't you?" "I thought I did. But..." I paused, watching a pair of birds squabble over the same branch outside her office window. "I thought I wanted the empire," I finally said, "but what I really wanted was to not be erased." That night, I walked through the plaza we once co-owned, the one he used to boast about, take clients through, flash that practice grin like a gold-plated promise. Now, it was mine. The lights were still on, tenants still open. Life moved, unbothered. And me? I didn't want to run it. I didn't want to lord it over anyone. I wanted to give it purpose. So I made some changes. converted one of the vacant offices into a support hub, free legal clinics, financial workshops, quiet meetups for women rebuilding from ground zero. I named it the Sixth Clause. Only a few people understood the reference, but those who did, they smiled wide. One Thursday, a young woman knocked on the door of the new center before it even officially opened. Early 30s, nervous posture, a bruise she tried to hide under her scarf. She asked if we were the place from the article. I said yes. She nodded, then whispered, "He said no one would believe me." I stepped aside, held the door open. "We believe you already." The blog grew. Not explosive, but steady. A quiet army was forming. Women who weren't waiting for someone to give them power, just a place to remember they already had it. Some sent photos, some sent letters. One mailed me a key to her old storage unit with a note. "Inside is everything I was afraid to let go of. I don't need it anymore. Burn it or use it for your center." I opened it. Inside were journals, dresses, divorce papers, a phone full of unread texts from a man who never deserved her. We held a bonfire behind the plaza. She came to watch. She cried the whole time. Then she danced. And then, one last unexpected envelope arrived from Robert. Again. But this time, not a letter. A check. A donation. $20,000 made out to the Sixth Clause. There was no note, just a one-line memo scribbled in his handwriting. "For the version of you I should have supported." I didn't cash it. I donated it anonymously to a scholarship fund for women studying law. Ellen helped me set it up. Then I mailed the check back to him. Ripped in half. No reply ever came. And just when I thought the past was truly behind me, I ran into her. Not Paige. Not his old lawyer. My daughter-in-law. The same woman who once told my son I was unstable during my divorce. The one who said I made everything dramatic. We ran into each other at a coffee shop. She blinked, looked startled, then said, "Beth, you look different." I smiled. "I feel different." She tried to make small talk, asked about the blog, about the plaza, about Robert. I kept it brief, not cold, just done. She asked, before leaving, "Do you ever miss how things used to be?" I thought for a moment, then said, "No, I miss myself for too long to miss anyone else." She walked away quietly. I never saw her again. Later that month, a newspaper ran a follow-up article titled, "The Woman Who Didn't Just Win, She Rebuilt." They asked for a photo. I gave them one. Not of the courtroom, not of Robert's wedding, not even of the Sixth Clause. It was me, standing at the dock by the old lake house. Arms crossed, hair silver and proud, expression soft but not fragile. They ran it full page. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look like anyone's ex-wife. I looked like a woman who had never left herself behind. I used to wonder how justice would feel. I pictured a scene, courtroom gasps, gavel slams, my voice echoing with righteous fury. Something dramatic, something cinematic, something that would shake the world the way he once shook mine. But that's not how it happened. Justice didn't come with thunder. It came quietly, like a door that had been stuck for years finally opening, not because I forced it, but because I stopped apologizing for knocking. The Sixth Clause opened officially in the spring. The ribbon cutting was small. A local reporter, a few neighbors, Ellen, Paige, and 12 women who had been quietly waiting for someone to tell them, "You're not crazy, you're not too much, you're not alone." One of them asked to speak. A retired nurse, 63 years old. She stood under our little banner and said, voice trembling, "I spent 40 years caring for people who didn't care back. Today I start caring for myself." Everyone applauded. Except me. I cried. That night, I stayed behind to lock up. The place still smelled like paint and paper. I wandered the halls, 3 rooms, 2 windows, 1 heartbeat. On the wall near the entrance, we'd framed the prenup. Just page 6. Not as a threat, not as a joke, as a reminder. That power can live in the places people expect you to overlook. That a signature you made in your 20s can become a weapon in your 60s if you have the courage to wield it. I took the long way home that night. Passed by the courthouse, the old cafe, even the building where Robert used to hold his board meetings. The lights were off now. The sign had been removed. He moved to another city, I heard, quietly. No grand departure, no farewell parties, just a man walking away from the ruins he swore would outlast everyone. He tried to reach out one last time, a voicemail. Not angry, not begging. Just this. I hope you're happy, Beth, really. I hope you found something worth more than what I lost. I didn't reply. Not because I couldn't. Because I didn't have to. A month later, a college reached out Women's Studies department. One of the professors had read the blog, then the article. They wanted to name a guest lecture series after me. The Elizabeth Franklin Speaker Series, Women Reclaiming Power After Silence. I almost declined. But then I thought of that nurse, of Paige, of that young woman who knocked before we even opened our doors. So I said yes, not for my name, for theirs. I stood at the podium in a room of 120 people, students, professionals, survivors, fighters. I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. I told them my story, not the legal version, not the blog version, the real version. I told them about the time I pretended to be asleep while he whispered to his new lover in the hallway. About the time I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize my own expression. About the silence that started as survival and turned into self-erasure. And then I told them about the day I remembered who I was before he rewrote my story. I ended with this. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. They stood when I finished. Not because I was brilliant, because they were ready to stand too. One night near the end of summer, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the streetlight flicker. A girl walked past. Teenager, head down, hoodie up, just a glimpse of her face under the glow. She looked so much like me at that age, unsure, small, invisible in her own skin. I didn't know her, but I whispered anyway. I hope you never let anyone turn your voice into wallpaper. She didn't hear me, but maybe the world did. Before I went to bed, I opened my journal. The same one I'd started the day Ellen told me the prenup had value. I flipped to the last page and wrote, he said I was part of his past. What he didn't realize is that I was the part that would define him. Elizabeth Franklin, not his mistake, not his wife, just me, whole, enough, free.